right, welcome back. This is week number 6, if you can believe it, of the Guitar Gym for Rookies. And how do you like my new digs? This is the new shed. So I moved from another house, and last week we had a lesson in the basement, and today we are back in the new shed here. So I'm getting the whole space sorted out and try a couple different angles, and hopefully you enjoy the warmth of this space as much as I do. So week number 6 here, I want to talk about playing pentatonic scales. So if you hear some motorcycles and trucks in the background, don't be worried. They're at a safe distance, I hope. So playing pentatonic scales, we talked about playing major scales. We went through our pick technique and making sure we can find all the nice, really good, wise kernels to be able to play smart and to be able to play and train smart. And I think that's the most important thing here at the Guitar Gym for Rookies. Not just repetition, but correct repetition, and just finding the nice little bit of wisdom that we need to be more effective, not just putting in the time, but making sure it's the right thing. So for pentatonic scales, this tends to be one of the first things that everybody learns. You have like the 5th fret, after you sort of get your G, your C, your C, your G, sometimes an A7 in there, and then you go. Right? And that's a very, very common pattern. And what I noticed when I learned pentatonics years ago, I actually learned my major scales first. And I know that a lot of people kind of do the opposite way, where they learn the pentatonics first and then go to major scales. I learned it the other way, and I'm grateful for that, because when I came to pentatonic scales, it was a new option. It didn't feel like the only option. So if you've ever heard of that term, the pentatonic boxes, that means sort of these little shapes that you can play, and we'll go through a couple of those today. But I think it's important to make sure that you don't think in terms of just the box, right? You want to make sure you are aware of the sound of what's happening, so that you're not just stuck to the shape. And I know a lot of guitar players, I'm sure you know exactly what I'm talking about if you've come across any pentatonic scales before. You can get stuck with a couple of familiar shapes, and then it stays like that for years and years, and you wonder how to sort of get out of that. So I want to go through the basic idea of what a pentatonic scale is, and then we'll hop into, similar to what we did last week with our scales, we'll go from 1 octave, then we'll go to 2 octaves and 3 octaves. And where I want to land in this lesson is for you to have a familiarity of what a pentatonic scale sounds like, but how to achieve that in different spots on the fretboard and in multiple octaves. Because remember, we don't want just a couple of different patterns. We want options, right? That's the best thing for your playing. It has been said that the pentatonic scale goes back to ancient Greeks, which is kind of cool. A little side note, but pentatonics, you have heard of this everywhere, from 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s rock, the 80s monster ballads. That's all so much of the pentatonic, the blues, jazz. It's really found everywhere. And it's so fascinating that there's a direct line from the ancient Greeks to tight leather hair metal. Isn't that fascinating? I think that's so funny. That's free. You don't have to pay for that one. And so basically what pentatonic means is that penta means 5, right? So in a normal major scale, you'd play your root, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and then the 8th is just the root all over again. So we basically have 7 notes. A pentatonic scale removes 2 of those. So now you have 5 notes in a scale, and that sounds like this. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we'd start over again. There's our G all the way up there again. And what's interesting about this, so for the major, you're actually leaving out the 4th of the scale, root, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and you're leaving out the 7th. When you do a minor pentatonic scale, which would sound like this, you're actually leaving out the 2nd in the degree of scales and the 6th. And when you do that, you get some really interesting sounds, and that's why you can play the pentatonics over major chords, minor chords. They're really, because they're avoiding some of the colors that might clash a little bit. If you're playing in G major, right, a lot of times pentatonics, you can play a minor pentatonic while you're in G major, and we just call that blues. Right? Because you should do if you were playing a major scale, if you played somehow when you're doing that and you're leaving out your second and your sixth, it works, right? So all that to say that the pentatonics have a deep history, but also they're extremely useful in so many different styles, all right? So let's stop yapping here for a second and let's hop into exercise number 1. So Jason, my good handy friend at Jam Play, will put the tab up on the screen. And this week, I want to do these at 72 beats per minute. So I have this little trusty, I think I've showed this to you guys before. This is the Zip Beat. I think this was Sabine. Yamaha makes one as well that has the click, so you're not just hearing the click, you're actually visually seeing what's going on between the beat. I find that helpful. Okay. So let's jump right in. So what we're going to do is you're going to start on a G. This is just be a single octave of a G major pentatonic. So go ahead and play your open G. And then you're going to use your second finger on the second fret. And then open. And then third. And then you're going to go open on the high E. And then the third again. Right? So it's not a terribly complicated sound, or not a terribly complicated shape, but remember, we want to get acquainted with the sound so that we can take the sound, the idea, the feel, the color of that, and put it on all the different parts of the fretboard. We don't want to just learn shapes, we want to know what is the color and the mood behind the shape, and then you're not stuck, right? So and then I just go to 2 again to sort of loop it again, to get back to the beginning. You'll notice on the tab I have it listed with a down, up, down, up, down, up. We're doing these with quarter notes. So you can do a down, up, you can do all down, you can do pretty much whatever you want. The important thing is just to be in control of what you're doing, right? We did a whole lesson on pick control and why that's so important, because after you get a good autopilot with this hand, then you can sort of watch what's happening here, right? So take some time to really think about how you're holding the pick and making sure that you're efficient, you're relaxed, you're clear, you're accurate, so that that frees up the brain to really focus on what's happening on the left hand. Okay, 72 beats per minute. Ready? Double check. Yep, 72. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. We'll do it again, just loop a little more. One more time. Last time. Excellent. So remember when we did our major scales, we talked about same beats per minute, but now we're going to do a G minor. Okay, so instead of playing our G major, we're going to do minor. But remember, the minor is taking out the second and the sixth of our major, of the minor scale, the G minor scale. And that's when you get to this sound right here. And then back down again. And then at the end of this, we'll just do the third again, the third fret with your third finger, just to loop it back to the beginning, all right? So let's try that together. And one thing that I will say that's important, we talked about this a little bit with doing your major scales, is sometimes it's helpful when you're playing all in one position to sort of choose a finger for each fret. That means that when you play the second fret, you kind of reserve your second finger. When you play the first fret, any note on the first fret, whatever string, you use your first finger. And it's important to make sure that you build a sequence of fingers, because if you do a different finger each time, your brain is always confused, and then it sort of memorizes the confusion every time you play it. And that can cause a lot more frustration, right? So sometimes just a tiny little bit more legwork in the beginning, some more mental focus, what fingers am I using to play this shape, can save you a lot of aggravation down the road. All right, so here we go. This is number 2, all right, our 1 octave G minor pentatonic, 72 beats per minute. 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. Again. Again. Two more times. Excellent. All right, so now what we want to do is when we go to number 3, one thing that's interesting is you can play G major or a G major pentatonic scale or an E minor pentatonic scale over the same key, right? So if you're playing anything that's in the key of E minor, anything that's in the key of G major, these will work. Now there's a term you've heard before with relative major and relative minor. And it's because they share a lot of the same notes between those two keys. That's why they say sort of the closest family relationship to the next scale would be your relative major, relative minor. And here's what that means in guitar talk. If you're playing in a minor key, so let's just say this is our E minor right here, right? If you're in E minor, all you have to do is actually count up 3 frets, 1, 2, 3, and then switch to major. So that means that E minor, right? I just go up 1, so the first fret, 2, 3, and now I'm in G major. So if you're playing a minor key, you go up 3 frets and make it major, and that would be your relative major key. So that means that I would play G major. So if I'm playing just a right, you can hear how there's a lot of the same notes. They're very similar, but you're starting on a different note and ending on a different note. If you're in a major key, all you have to do is count down 3 frets and go to minor. That will reveal what your relative minor is. It's a good rule of thumb, so anytime you hear that kind of lingo tossed around, you don't have to feel like, oh man, I should know this, or we get the guitar glaze eyes of like, music theory, just relative major, relative minor. It's talking about the difference of 3 frets. Just think about it as a good guitar mental shortcut. So if I'm playing in the key of C major, right, and I want to find my relative minor, I would just go down 3 notes, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I have C. What comes before C? B. Then there's a B flat, and then A. All right, and then I have to make sure that's a minor. So if I'm starting on a major, I go down 3 and then make it minor. So that means my relative minor to C major is A minor. All right. So what we want to do here is we're actually going to connect in one octave a G major pentatonic to an E minor pentatonic, because this gives you a little bit more options. So remember, we're not just thinking in terms of just the box and then go to the next box and the next box and the next box. We want to listen for the sound, the characteristic, the feel, the color of what these sounds are. And you'll notice over different chords it sounds interesting. So if you played in G major pentatonic when somebody else, your friend you're jamming with, plays E minor, that has a really different sound. But then once you go to G major, right, and then in an E minor, so it just gives you a little bit more options of things to experiment with. If you have a loop pedal, that's great. Just do 4 bars of E minor, 4 bars of G, and you can practice going up and back and forth between those. So in exercise 3 here, what we want to look at is starting with what we did in exercise 1. So it's a very, that's review. But then the second part, when we get into measure 10 here, that's when it changes down to an E minor. So let's look at the very first measure of that. We have G, then you have an A here, and then the B string, 3rd fret there, the D, and then you go up to the high E, and then G, right? But I'm now, just to connect it, to sort of fill out the beats in the measure, I'm just going to put a D in there, because that's going to sort of lead me to the inevitable E minor right here. And the E minor sounds like this. And then the D is sort of what connects back to the G. So it's sort of like the hinge note between going G major and E minor. So again, through that slowly. D, E, all right, so now what we want to do right here is we'll just play through that real quickly. Not too quick. Yeah, that's 72 beats per minute still. Sorry, do we have a question coming? No, okay. So let's try that together. Ready? 1, 2, 1, 2, ready, go. Back to the beginning, back to G. To D, E minor now. Again to G. Again, 2 more times. Last time. End on G. There you go. All right, so we have a question here. Can the relative major minor rule be used to move up the neck for soloing in higher octaves? Absolutely. And that's where it gets interesting, because I remember when I was a kid watching these blues players, It was fascinating to me how you could get comfortable with this part of the fretboard. And then I played a little bit of around the 5th fret because I got used to that sort of A minor pentatonic box, right? But then once you get up to this part of the neck, it seemed even more strange or sort of dark. It's just uncharted territory. And then all the way up above here, you know, and I had a guitar that was just hard to reach, so I couldn't even, those weren't really options up there. But I'd watch these players kind of play and then go all the way up here and back down, and how do they know what they're doing, you know? Well, we talked previously about how, in a previous lesson, about how the guitar fretboard is sort of like a conveyor belt. What I mean by that is that all of the notes as you go up the fretboard, by the time you get up to the 12th fret, everything starts to repeat itself again, right? So I could play the same thing. So for instance, if I play E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, okay, now I have to get up to F and it starts the musical alphabet again. So if I played this right here, and then I go all the way up to where this note would be, I have to go 12 frets above that. So that would actually be, you go to the double dots and count up 3 more, and then... So sometimes you can play a lot of the same... Right? So which is a really cool thing, that you can hop all the way up here and it's just going an octave higher. It's the same notes, just a pitch higher, right? Just an octave higher, set of pitches higher. And that gives you a different color. You're playing, you know, a lot of the same notes, but it gives you a different color, and the same thing will happen there. But now, instead of, like, for this, we just did open strings, right? Now, your open, your new open is pretty much the 12th fret. So you'd have to outline that same shape like this, which would become 15, 12, 15, 12. So, right? And then, right? So now if you want to do your relative minor, the same principle works. So I'm playing major. Now I need to go down to the minor from there. 1, 2, 3. So I need to do an E minor, right? Right? So again, I had to find a little bit of a different shape. But if you know what the sound is, then you don't have to worry about where am I at? Where's that shape? You just close your eyes, and if you're familiar with that sound, you can find it on the fretboard, and that's the most important thing. All right, so yes, it can be used. The relative major minor rule can every octave it works. All right, so the next thing we want to do here is number 4. This is called we'll do the 2-octave G major pentatonic. And what's interesting about this is usually the second pentatonic scale that you'll learn after this one. Right? And you usually don't realize that you're playing that in that same scale in 2 different octaves, and then again you get stuck in the shape. This one is usually the second one, because this would be playing it in G major, and that looks like this. Right? And that right there is a G major pentatonic, and that's usually referred to as like box 1 if you're doing major pentatonics. So it's important to learn what that is, and then we're actually going to expand it out from there, and we'll do all kinds of sliding pentatonics. But this box is really, really important to get under your fingers. But we want to make sure we don't get stuck in the box. So as soon as you get comfortable with it, I want to be able to connect to some of the other shapes as soon as possible. So what we'll do is you start with your second finger on the low E on the 3rd fret, and then go to the 5th fret. If you find it difficult, I know that when just getting going, like my passion being a rookie, what was difficult for me is just figuring out how to play the pinky on the low E string. Remember the 3 things that we've talked about. You want to look at what your wrist position is, okay? So if your wrist is kind of like going backwards like this, that makes it really hard for you to reach. The second thing is your thumb position. So make sure your thumb is behind the neck, point it up, and line it up with wherever your middle finger goes. That gives you a good sort of centered position. And the third thing, this is a thing that not a lot of people realize, but freedom of your elbow. So if you're used to sort of playing where you actually are resting your elbow on your knee, just remember that can really limit your ability to reach. So sometimes frustration of, oh, I'm not going to use the pinky, I'm just going to do all the pentatonics with 1 3 1 3 1 3, whatever. I understand that. I totally get that. But it may just be a few micro movements till your pinky suddenly becomes comfortable to use, right? So you might as well try that. So again, your wrist position, right? Your thumb position, and then the freedom of your elbow. So now when you go here, you'll start with your second finger on the 3rd fret of the low E, and then go to the 5th fret of the low E. And if your thumb is back, that makes it a little bit easier. And we're doing the same thing here. We talked about sort of reserving a finger for each fret, right? Again, that's the smart thing to do when you're training with these. Give your brain a pattern to latch onto, and then you'll change it later, but make sure you don't confuse it from the beginning. So we have 2, 4 on frets 3 and 5. Then I'm going to use my first finger on the A string here. And I'm going to go from the 2nd fret here all the way up to the 5th fret with my pinky. And then I'm going to go first finger on the 2nd fret on the D, up to the 5th fret of the D here. So far we have. And now we're basically doing the octave that we did before. But instead of using open strings, we're staying within what they call it a box, because you can move it anywhere you want. So we have your 3rd fret, 5th fret, 2nd, 5th, 2nd, 5th, and then your first finger is going to go here on the 2nd fret of the G. Then use your 3rd finger on the 4th fret there. And then I like to do 2 4 2 4, which means fingers 2 4 2 4 on frets 3 and 5 on both the top 2 strings there. Now, one thing that makes it important, well, I would say another reason why it's important to sort of be really careful about choosing proper fingers when you learn a pattern like this, is when you have to reverse it. I remember playing a scale and getting all the way up to the top, and then I'm like, great, I got there, and then I have to go all the way back down, and my fingers just lost the pattern. If you're really intentional about choosing the right fingers on your way up, it doesn't solve the problem, but it makes it a whole lot easier to sort of just reverse and go back the way you started. So. And then back there. Right? And this you can move anywhere on the fretboard. And that, again, that's one of the great things about guitar. You learn things in one key, you can switch them to another key, switch them to another key. You just have to be aware of what your open strings were so you can sort of slide them up. But what do I mean by that? You can play this in A. You just have to go G sharp A, so we have G, G sharp A, and then play the same exact shape. Right? That's one of the great things about this. You're learning how to play in each key. So now what we want to do is practice this together, and we're going to go at 72 beats per minute, so we'll sort of hang there for this lesson. So let's do this. Exercise 4. Go ahead and look down at the tab there. 1 2 1 2, ready, go. Repeat. Again. 2 more times. Last time. And end right there on G. One thing I will say is I know it's helpful. I find it helpful to practice with a click. Sometimes it can be very, very frustrating. And one thing you don't want to worry about is actually feeling like you have the frustration of learning the shape as well as the frustration of sort of keeping it in time. I know there's a lot of different schools of thought, and I've always found right now whenever I'm practicing, I do have a metronome going, but many times I actually go slow enough without a metronome, without the pressure of trying to keep up with a click, right? Or that space in between the click, just so I can really fully understand what's happening with the fingers. And then I put the metronome on to sort of clean it up. So if you feel a little bit frustrated because the shape is new, your hand position is here, you're also trying to go with a click, there's a whole lot of things that are sort of in taking up your mental RAM, you know, remove one of those so you have a little bit of a break. So if it's easier, just take it slow. Don't worry about a beat yet. Then when you get comfortable with the shape, then you put the metronome on, and that might be more helpful for you to clean it up. So sometimes I'll start with a metronome from the beginning. Sometimes that gets into the polishing phase. So just know that you have the freedom to do that. We have, I have to close the shades. There's a glare. Hold on a second. All right, let's see if this is a little bit better. Getting used to all the new parts of the woodshed. Hopefully that works there. Okay, so that's exercise 4. Let's go on to exercise 5 now. And what we're doing here is pretty much the same concept, except now we're actually going to be going, over a G minor pentatonic, and we're going to do the same thing in 2 octaves, right? So this is if you get, again, if you first learned in A minor, that A minor pentatonic shape, right? We're doing this here just in G because we were in G previously. So what you want to do here is put your first finger on the low string, right? Your low E on the 3rd fret. Okay, and then you're going to go on the 3rd fret and then go all the way up to the 6th fret of the low E. And remember, if that's feeling really like you have to stretch a lot, or if you're kind of like, the pinky's not working, I'm just going to throw the 3rd finger up there, that's fine. You can do that. Just make sure that you're not sort of avoiding playing the pinky. If it actually is a little bit more comfortable, you can do that. You know, it may not be more efficient in the end because of some of the other patterns we'll go through. You'll have to get comfortable using your pinky, but just analyze that. Is this going to work for my technique using the pinky here, or is it just unfamiliar, right? If maybe it's not going to work, but just be aware of that if you're avoiding using it for any reason. All right, so the 3rd fret. So go ahead and look at exercise 5 there. So put your first finger on the 3rd fret, and then your pinky goes on the 6th fret, and then your first finger goes on the 3rd fret, 3rd finger goes on the 5th fret, first finger on the D string there, 3rd fret, and then 5th fret there, and then the same thing here. So what's cool about that shape is that you're just doing the same thing 3 strings in a row. Right? And then from there, you're going to put your first finger on the 3rd fret there, and then your 4th finger is going to go on the 6th fret, which is the same as what we did here, and then all the way up here. All right? So it sounds like this. again, if this is feeling tricky with that pinky, just analyze the moment. You might realize, okay, all right, yes, I remember, that's right. We have to do the thumb position, the wrist, and the elbow. But within 5 minutes, you may actually be back to the elbow on the knee again. So sometimes it takes the first 100 times of reminding yourself till your muscle memory is finally like, all right, we give up, you win, you know? So just keep being aware of that, because a lot of times, if I'm finding something that I've practiced so many times, I'm starting to feel a lot more like it's becoming more of a challenge. I'm subconsciously making other decisions, maybe more tension, maybe my arm's in a different position. So, and then as soon as I fix that, it's back to, now it feels familiar and easier again. All right, so let's try this together, and we're gonna do 72 beats per minute, the same there. All right? So start with your first finger on the 3rd fret. 1, 2, ready, go. Again. Again, beginning of that. Two more times. One more time. This is the last time. All right, so we have a question here. Are there exercises that you would recommend to increase the strength and autonomy of the pinky? Absolutely. The very first thing that I think that's important when sort of gaining a little bit more independence from the pinky, it won't ever feel independent unless you really, really work on making it independent. And it's you gotta build up his confidence there, right? And then after that, it gets a little bit easier to throw it into some of these shapes and have it feel like I can do this, you know? So the first thing, this is a really helpful exercise that I used to do, and it's not one you really have to do anything with your picking hand. So just go to the G, right, that string, and put your first finger on the 5th fret, and then your second on the 6th, and your 3rd and 4th, just 4 frets in a row, right? So your pinky ends on fret 8. And you're just gonna press all of them down at the same time. Now typically, what happens is when you can press your first finger down and your second finger will move a little bit. You put your second finger down and that 3rd finger moves a lot, and then the pinky is going to want to follow that. So that is not something you'll ever completely solve, but this will help you gain confidence of independence between your 3rd and 4th. So again, the 5th fret, just line it up like this. And this is kind of just a good mental and physical stretch here, right? So take your pinky, everything's going to stay pressed, and put your pinky now goes down to the D string, just one string down, right? And then go up to the B. And what you're forcing yourself to do is actually not move the rest of your hand. These stay straight, right? And so when you're going on local strings right there, you can feel a little bit of a stretch, you know, but that's what's actually helping you. That's my dehumidifier, sorry. That's what's actually helping you gain a little bit more confidence, so that when you do a bigger stretch here, so now we're gonna go to the A string and then up to the B, A, up to the B. And you'll notice that the pinky starts to feel a little bit sort of kinked, or a little bit of more tension than you're used to. So just analyze the tension, exaggerate it, right? So put as much tension in your arm as you can and relax. Because now you want to analyze what the tension is and what to do about it. Not just, okay, I have tension, now what? Exaggerate it. Put as much tension as you can, and now start to train your muscles to recognize the tension and relax it. Okay, so from there, we're going to go to the A, to the B string, and now this is the hardest one. Go all the way to the low E, or as much as you can reach. You don't have to worry too much. And then all the way up here. And this is just giving your pinky confidence and good stretch, right? Now we'll go back here, and you'll do the same thing with your third finger, right? This is not in the tab. This is just to answer a question here. But it's very easy. It's the way that I approach guitar is pretty much when I find a problem that's happening, I just sort of make up an exercise around it to work on it. So you can do whatever version you want of this as long as it's working on the problem. Then you got it. It's correct, you know. Okay. Your third finger is going to go to the D and then to the B. D, B. And then I'll go down to the A, the same, just like that, right? And then down to the low E, high E, low E, high E. And then eventually what I kind of do is just flip back and forth. So maybe this, the third finger is now going to go here, and my pinky goes here. And then I just sort of hop in between those. And that feels really, really difficult. But again, it's difficult. That's why we're practicing it. If you could do it the first time, you wouldn't have to practice it, right? So if it feels difficult, that's the whole point. We're trying to get comfortable with the difficult so that it all becomes a whole lot easier and more smooth. And then you go all the way up here and all the way here and then all the way here. This is probably the hardest one, going this way with your third finger here. And don't worry about that, you know, just stretch as far as you can. So that's one way that I find to be really, really helpful. That exercise, you're sort of just practicing the autonomy, the independence of the pinky. And the other thing I want to say about that is just a very, very, very simple thing. It's complicated when you put it into, you know, various songs, but just start being aware of all the many ways you're avoiding using your pinky and opt to use your pinky instead, right? So if you're used to playing your pentatonic like this, and you've played it years and years like that with 1-3, 1-3, right? Start to look for all the opportunities you may be avoiding and just put the pinky back in. Give him a job to do. He's bored. He needs some work, right? And I think between those two things, just practicing the autonomy and then just being aware of any time you're avoiding it and actually starting to put them to work, I think that puts you on the right path to getting comfortable with the pinky and confident with the pinky, that it will be able to deliver you know, whatever you need from it in the same way you ask a task of any of your other fingers. You'll have confidence that the pinky can do it. So I hope that answers your question. Okay. Do we have any other questions here? Just looking. No. Okay. Let's go on to exercise 6. And this is where it starts to get interesting. So we played the G major and we played the G minor pentatonics. If you put some of the notes that are in the major shape and that are now, when you're playing a minor shape, you get this really interesting bluesy sound, and that's exactly what this is. So if I'm playing... Okay, so what this shape is doing, I'm going... Right? But it actually, this would be if I'm playing a minor pentatonic, right? But I'm actually hitting this, right? Now that would be the major. So what I'm doing is I'm actually just going to play for a split second a note from the major while I'm playing the minor, and you get this sound. So it doesn't sound wrong. It sounds like an extra flavor. And then we resolve it here because it should be, but we're going now to the major. Right? So that whole exercise in 6 is just a tiny example of when you're comfortable Again, not just with the shapes, but with the sound of what is happening with your major and your minor pentatonic. You put them together and you get that really, really cool bluesy sound. Right? That's that really cool, I love the sound of that. So let's try this. So start with your first finger all the way up on the 3rd fret of the high E, and then you're gonna go to your pinky there on the 6th fret of the B, and then first finger on the 3rd. Now you can do this with your 4th finger or your 3rd. I tend to just, again, if I have the pinky available, I'm gonna opt to use it because I wanna make sure it always feels loved and included. Okay, so there's your first one. Down, up, with your pick hand here. And then we're gonna go, I'm sorry. And then instead of going here, we're actually gonna go to the 3rd fret of the G, right? Because that would be, now I'm gonna slide from the 3rd fret all the way up here. Well, not all the way up, it's just a millimeter there up to here. And then we're gonna end on G, right? So we have, all right, so let's try this. All right, let's try that at 72 beats per minute. 1, 2, ready, go. And just hold that for a second and then we'll start over. Again. And I'm extending that a little bit more just to keep it going. Two more times. Last time. Excellent. All right, so we're winding down, and for the last 10 minutes, this is what I want the whole lesson to really come to. This is a really, really important thing. When you learn your pentatonics, you learn them. Most people start right from the beginning training with the boxes. You want to be comfortable going from box to box. So for instance, if I'm playing G major, right? So I'm basically ascending on G and descending on A. And you can do whatever, positions you want. But what's interesting is now if you take the pentatonic sound, we're going to have the next two shapes are going to start all the way here and end all the way up on this part of the neck. And I call this the sort of 3/2 pattern, and then the last one is the 2/3 pattern. And all that means is that for the first one here in the G major pentatonic, this is a sliding pentatonic pattern. You can get lots of really cool phrasing with this pattern. You're playing 3 notes on a string. So I'm sure you've noticed up to this point, most pentatonics are gonna be 2 notes on a string, then you go to the next string. Right? And you'll play, more on the top string because you just have to repeat to go back down to where you started. But if you play 3 notes on a string and then 2 on the next string, then 3 on the next string, 2 on the next string, so it's this 3, 2, 3, 2. If we're going to do that in G, we already have the idea of what a major pentatonic sounds like. Okay, so now let's try this. We're going to go 1, 2, 3. Okay, so right, we know we need to do that sound, so we're going to do 3 notes. And because we're sliding, I just like to slide whenever you can. So 1, 3, and then slide that one up here. So now we've played 3 notes on that string, The next string we're going to play 2. So this is the 3, then 2, 3, then 2. Right? And now we're going to go up here and do the exact same thing. Right? Right? These patterns, if you've come across them before, they can feel a little bit confusing again, especially on your way back down. But if you forget where you're at, just sort of look for local clues. Did I play 3 notes on this string or only 2? Then it'll sort of direct you. If I only played 3, then the next one I'm going to play 2, right? I find that to be a really helpful way of sort of mentally categorizing it. So we're going to start with your first finger on the 3rd fret there, and then your 3rd finger on 5, and then slide all the way into 7. And then we're going to go to the 5th fret with your 1st. Okay, so slide. And then we're going to do the same thing here. So now we've done 3, now we have 2. Now let's go back to 3 notes. We're on the D string. 1, 3, slide. And this one you won't really use your pinky. You can for one of the parts coming up. I'll show you in a second, but you don't have to. Right? Now here's where it changes, right? When you first learn to play guitar or to tune your guitar, when you first learn to play, you have to line up the 5th fret and then tune from there. 5th fret, 5th fret, 5th fret, and then all of a sudden you have to go down to the 4th fret, right? And that sort of throws off the pattern a little bit. So we have to shift 1 fret up to keep this sound going. So we have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. And now instead of going to the 7th fret here, I'm going to go to the 8th. 1, 3, slide, 1, 3. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, right? And do you remember we talked about with our scales, the octaves? So for the octaves, you actually, to find the next octave, you jump up 2 strings and then over 2 frets. Right? And then once you get onto this string here, then you have to go up 2 strings and over 3 frets. Right? So that's another sort of local signpost. If you get lost, you feel like you're circling around, look for your closest octave. And that can really help. You don't have to stretch your fingers out and play them all at the same time unless you really love to do that, which I do, but so now what we're doing here, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Now on our way back down, 2 notes there. And then your first finger is going to be the one that goes back. And then, right? 2, now 3 notes. And you end where you started. Right? So now we've gone from this all the way up to this, and we're thinking in terms of the pentatonic sound that we started with in 3 different octaves now. So again, we're not thinking of the boxes, right? We're already getting familiar with the sound so that we can play it all over. Right? And there's so many solos that will come from that sound. And what's cool is you can actually hop over different notes. So instead of, you could go, right? There's lots of riffs and lots of things that are from these sliding shapes. So they feel very freeing because any of those notes that you play is going to sound really good if someone's playing in G or E minor, right? So let's try that at 72 beats per minute. 1, 2, ready, go. Slide, 1, 2. Slide. So remember, just ask yourself, if you don't know where to go, did I just play 2 notes on that string? Okay, the next string has got to be 3. Next string is 2, next string is 3. Let's try that again together. 2, ready, go. 3 notes. 2, 2 notes, 3, 2 notes, shift down, 2 notes, then all the way down there. What I like to do, I'll actually sort of eliminate this note right here and I'll play. And then instead of going here, I'll just hop to the next octave, which has a nice sound to it to me. So I like these sliding shapes. I feel like I get a lot of mileage out of it. And then the final one here is the opposite of that. So you're thinking that you have we're going to be doing 2 notes and then 3, and then 2 and then 3. So this is the 2 over 3 as opposed to the 3 over 2, which I know can get a little bit confusing, but you know, the more you practice it, more familiar you get with it. It helps. It gets a little bit easier. This one we're actually going to start here, but this is going to be in the key of C. If we wanted to do this 2 over 3 pattern in G major, you'd actually have to start it all the way up here on the 10th fret, and it ends a little bit up here, so I thought maybe it would be easier to hop to a different key for this final one. But this is going to be in the key of C, right? Because this is another really common key that you'll see a lot. That you'll see, huh? Okay, so first finger is going to start on the 3rd fret there, and then your 3rd finger. So now, what we started with G, we started with 3 and then 2. Now we're going to do the opposite. We're going to go 2, 3. Okay, and now 2, 3, 2, 3. So we did 3, then 2, 3, 2, 3. This is very common. Right, that famous Let It Be solo, this is exactly that pattern, right? It's really just outlining a C major pentatonic in 3 different octaves, but you can see how you immediately get a really cool sound from it, and you're not stuck in, right? Not that that's bad, you know, you want those, you want to be able to be comfortable with that, but remember, in the Guitar Gym for Rookies, you want options, wisdom and options. So here we go. We're going to start with your first finger here, and then 3, and then 1, 3, slide, 1, 3, 1, 3, slide, 1, 3, 1, 3, slide. So let's try that together at 72 beats per minute. Ready, go. And then back down. 3, 2, 3, 2, 3, 2. One more time, up and down. 2, slide, 1, 2, 3, and then you'd end on a C there. All right, so now what we've gone through today is basically just outlining, okay, what is a pentatonic, oh, there's a bug in here, pentatonic scale, and not just the pentatonic shape, what is the scale, what is the sound? And that's what you want to look, look beneath the surface on just what some of those shapes are, because as you can see, if you, for that last one, like once you start feeling like maybe you're a little bit lost, if you remember what the sound of the pentatonic sounds like, then your fingers will go shopping for that correct note and you'll know if it's the right note or not. Whereas if you just play the patterns, you don't have the wisdom to know how to move from them, right? We want more options here. So we started with the major and the minor in 1 octave, then we expanded to 2 octaves, and now to the sliding shapes, 3 octaves. And that's how you want to start thinking about pentatonics, is all over the fretboard, not stuck in one shape, right? So I hope this was helpful for you. I had a lot of fun putting this together because the pentatonics are used absolutely everywhere, and yet so much of what I studied when I first came across them was just a couple of the boxes, and then I just felt like what to do with them just sort of I was sort of pushed off a cliff. I didn't know where else to go. I think getting towards the comfort of sliding the shapes up and down the fretboard will give you some nice melodic options, and it'll make it sound very musical for your soloing, right? So thank you so much for tuning in. Next week, we're going to keep going. We'll keep rolling. We'll do some arpeggios, and we'll just keep going. We have a couple of more weeks here. So I hope you're having a blast with this as much as I am. So have a great week. I'll see you next week. Thanks.